You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Rain fell not as water, but as needles of ice, stinging the ancient, gnarled skin of the blackwood. It was a place of whispered curses, a forest where the trees themselves held memories of screams. And on this night, a new scream was about to be etched into its roots. Kaelin, the ironclad king, a ruler who had carved his kingdom from frost and fury, stood at the very edge of his northern dominion. A century of solitude had built walls around his heart higher than any mountain fortification. He was a statue of a man unmoving as the tempest raged around his bare shoulders, his eyes, a piercing glacial blue, scanning the abyss. He sought nothing, felt nothing until he heard it. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't even a cry of pain. It was a sound torn from the very core of a soul refusing to shatter, a raw, furious roar of defiance that cut through the thunder's boom like a blade. It came from the east, from the forbidden canopy of the Blackwood Council territory. Neutrality was his vow, his cage. To intervene was to ignite a war that had smoldered for 100 years. His mind, a general's mind, commanded him to turn away. But his wolf, the beast that slept beneath his skin, stirred with a sudden, violent interest. That sound, it was a spark in his endless winter. He moved, not as a king, but as a force of the storm itself. The world blurred into streaks of darkness and rain as he crossed the distance in heartbeats, a ghost navigating a graveyard of trees. He saw the flicker of torches first, unnatural oranges against the deep green gloom, then the circle, runes carved into the sodden earth glowing with a sickly, malevolent green, and at its center a struggle. Guards, faceless in their grim armor, dragged a slight figure towards the circle's heart. Her clothes were torn, her dark hair plastered to a face pale with more than fear. With a final, brutal shove, they forced her to her knees in the mud. Kaelin melted into the shadow of a petrified oak, his presence vanishing into the night. He would watch. He would bear witness to this council justice, and then he would leave. That was the pact. The High Seer, a woman shrouded in robes the color of bone, stepped forward. Her voice was a dry rasp that silenced the very wind, Ilara of the Mistewad pack. You stand accused of corruption, of harboring a taint that poisons the wards and disturbs the sacred balance. The Silver Eyes are an abomination, a lineage lost to time and for good reason. The Blackwood shall now judge what your pack cannot bear to execute, a purification trial. A pretty name for a slaughter. Kaelin's keen eyes saw the truth immediately. The runes weren't for judgment, they were a cage, a seal. This was an offering. Ilara lifted her head then, rain mixed with blood from a cut on her temple, tracing a crimson path down her cheek. But it was her eyes that made Kaelin's breath catch. Silver, not gray, but actual luminous silver like captured moonlight. They burned. They swept across the ring of her accusers, past the stern seer, past the hulking guards, and landed on two figures who stood apart from the rest. A man, broad-shouldered, his jaw hard-lined, stared resolutely at the ground. Her betrothed, Ronan, and beside him a woman with golden hair, her face turned away, shoulders hunched as if against a physical blow. Lyra, her sister, not by blood but by an oath stronger than blood. Ilara's voice, when it came, was a broken whisper that carried on the storm. Lyra, the golden-haired woman, flinched but did not turn. Ronan, look at me. The man's fists clenched, but his gaze remained fixed on the mud at his feet. The betrayal was absolute. Kaelin saw the exact moment it settled into her bones, a colder chill than any rain. Her shoulders slumped for a heartbeat, the fire in her eyes guttering. This was it. The end. The seer raised her hands, chanting words that smelled of ash and iron. The carved runes erupted in a wall of emerald fire, sealing Ilara inside a prison of magic and flame. Step deeper, child, the seer commanded, a cruel mockery of mercy in her tone. Let the forest's ancient heart decide your fate. For a long, terrible moment, Ilara did not move. She knelt in the muck, a discarded thing, surrounded by the faces of everyone she had ever trusted. The rain soaked her through, the firelight danced in her silver eyes, then a sound bubbled up from her chest, a laugh. Dark, bitter, and hollow, devoid of any warmth, it was the sound of understanding, of a final puzzle piece clicking into a horrific picture. She rose to her feet, her movements slow, deliberate. She wiped the blood and rain from her face with the back of a trembling hand. When she spoke, her voice was clear, ringing with a terrifying calm that silenced the very storm. "You're not testing me," she said, her silver gaze locking onto the seers. "You're feeding me to it, because you're not afraid of what I am, you're terrified of what I might become." Then she did the unthinkable. She turned her back on them all, on her pack, on her betrayers, on the wall of fire. And she walked, head high, spine straight. She strode past the burning boundary and into the deepest, darkest throat of the Blackwood. She walked into her own grave without a single backward glance. The pack watched, stunned into silence, as the shadows swallowed her whole. Then, as if afraid the forest would retaliate for their offering, they scattered, extinguishing their torches, fleeing back to their hollow safety. The runes faded. The rain fell, and Kaelin remained. He stood frozen, the image of her proud, lonely walk burning behind his eyes. A pulse, deep and ancient, throbbed in the air where she had vanished. It vibrated in his own chest, a chord struck on a harp he thought long broken. Resonance. The legends whispered of it, the recognition of one ancient bloodline by another. It was impossible. That lineage was extinct, purged from the world, yet the proof had just walked into a death sentence with more courage than any warrior he'd ever known. Why? The question was a hook in his soul. Why did a girl with the blood of legends in her veins face annihilation alone? His wolf snarled, restless, furious, not alone. A century of careful neutrality, a lifetime of icy control, shattered in that single, resonant moment. With a growl that was more beast than man, Kaelin, the ironclad king, crossed the invisible border into council land. The forest welcomed him with a groan of bending branches, but he was its equal in primal power. He had to find her. He had to know before the Blackwood claimed its prize. The hunt was on, but the predator had just become the protector, and somewhere in the hungry dark, a queen who did not yet know her name was waiting. The Blackwood did not simply exist, it consumed. It drank the light, muffled sound and twisted direction until up was down and hope was a forgotten language. Ilara moved through it like a ghost, each step a symphony of pain. Her ribs screamed where a guard's boot had found its mark. The cut on her temple wept a steady rhythm into the collar of her torn dress, but these were distant complaints, echoes from a body that was rapidly becoming a stranger. The true agony was deeper, older. It hummed beneath her skin. A pressure, a presence, like a second heartbeat trapped behind a wall of glass. The suppression runes carved into her collarbone, her wrists, the base of her spine, glowed with a faint, sickly green light, reacting to the very air of this place. They were poison stitches holding her together, and they were failing. Every root she stumbled over, every guttural whisper from the unseen things in the undergrowth made them burn hotter, crack wider. Memories, sharp as thorns, pierced the haze of her pain. She was 5 again, small and confused, holding her mother's hand as they walked the perimeter of their village. The great warding stones, monoliths older than memory, had begun to sing, a low, resonant hum that made the air shimmer. Her mother's grip had turned to iron, her face pale as moonlight. "Don't look at them, Ilara, never touch them." But the elders had already seen. Their stares were cold stones pressed against her back, wrong, cursed, silver eyes. She was 8, hiding with Lyra in their secret hollow beneath the roots of the great willow. Lyra, sunshine to her shadow, had woven dandelions into her hair. "They're just scared," Lyra had whispered, her voice fierce with a child's loyalty. "Because you're special, my special sister." They had pricked their fingers, mingled their blood, and sworn a bond sister oath. Always, Lyra had promised. The memory was a physical ache, a phantom wound that hurt more than any bruise. A branch snapped directly behind her. Lyra whirled, a gasp tearing from her lips. Nothing. Only shifting shadows and the relentless drip-drip of water from the canopy. But the air grew thicker, colder. She wasn't alone. Tainted, the whisper slithered through the leaves, not in her ears, but in her mind. Cursed ours. I am not yours, she rasped, forcing her trembling legs to carry her forward. I belong to no one. The forest seemed to laugh, a sound of rustling leaves and creaking wood. The whispers grew, multiplying, swirling around her like a vicious choir. Alone, weak prey. Her vision blurred at the edges, the world tilted. Just lie down, a voice that sounded like her own, weary and defeated, sighed in her head. It would be so easy. The cold will take you quickly. No more pain, no more betrayal. For a heartbeat, she considered it. To simply stop, the temptation was a sweet, dark poison, but then she saw Lyra's turned shoulder. She heard Ronan's silence. She felt the seer's cold, triumphant gaze. No, a spark, small and stubborn, flared in her chest. They had wanted her to beg. She had laughed. They wanted her to die weeping. She would not give them that victory. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw, but she parted them, and she began to hum. It was a thread of sound, shaky and thin at first. An old runic lullaby her grandmother had sung, a melody about the first wolves who danced with the moon, about strength that flowed like hidden rivers. The council had forbidden such songs, calling them pagan echoes, but here in the forbidden forest the notes felt like a rebellion. As she hummed, pushing the melody into the oppressive dark, something shifted. The predatory whispers hesitated, confused. The sense of circling, closing in, paused. The creatures of the Blackwood knew fear, knew rage, knew hunger. They did not know this gentle, stubborn refusal to become prey. Ilara didn't know how long she walked, hummed, survived. Time lost all meaning, but eventually her body betrayed her. Her legs buckled, sending her crashing to her knees beside a black, gurgling stream. The world swam. This was it. The first night in the Blackwood was meant to be the last. She had defied the circle, defied the whispers, but her strength was spent. She dipped her hands into the icy water, trying to wash the blood from her face, but her fingers were too numb, her movements too clumsy. In the dark reflection, her silver eyes stared back, wide with exhaustion and gathering despair. Then in the water's glassy surface she saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, amber, hungry, and utterly inhuman, materializing from the gloom around the stream's bank. They had been waiting for this moment, for her to finally fall. Her humming stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, final. The eyes began to move, closing the circle. Ilara's breath hitched. She had no fight left. She could only watch her end approach. But then a new shadow fell across the water, not from the creatures but from behind her. It was vast, silent, and radiated a power so dense it made the air vibrate. The amber eyes froze, their predatory gleam flickering with something new, primal fear. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was caught between two terrors. Slowly, so slowly, she turned her head. There, standing between two ancient oaks, was a shape, a man, yet more than a man. He was silhouetted against the lesser dark, his shoulders impossibly broad, his posture that of a conqueror surveying a fallen land. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his gaze, a tangible weight, a blue fire intensity locked on her. He had been there, at the circle, watching. The forest creatures let out a unified whimper and melted away, their shadows dissolving into the greater darkness as if they had never been. Now she was truly alone with him, the silent king from the shadows. Was he salvation, or simply a different kind of end? Ilara tried to speak, to demand answers, but her voice failed her. All she could do was look up at the towering figure, her silver eyes meeting the place where his must be, a silent question hanging in the frigid air between them. Why? The silence stretched thin and taut as a bowstring. Kaelin watched the girl, Ilara, from the shadows, the resonance in his blood a relentless drumbeat. Mine, protect, ancient, ours, the instincts warred with a century of calcified logic. She was a complication, a spark that could ignite the powder keg of the Northern Territories. Yet, seeing her kneel there, broken but unbroken, defiance still flickering in those impossible silver eyes, it called to something deeper than strategy. It called to the king he had been before the world taught him to be a statue. He stepped forward, the forest floor silent beneath his boots. She flinched, a tiny, instinctive movement that sent a bolt of unexpected anger through him, not at her, at them. At everyone who had made her expect only violence from a stronger presence. He stopped a few paces away, not crowding her, giving her the space her frightened animal tension demanded. "The song," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to originate from the earth itself. "The runic lullaby." "Where did you learn it?" Her eyes widened further. She hadn't expected that question. She swallowed, her throat working. My grandmother, before the council forbade the old songs." Her voice was a frayed whisper, but there was steel underneath. "Who are you?" He ignored the question. The truth would terrify her more than the shadows. "You hummed to predators, a death song to calm your own end. That is either madness or a courage I have not seen in an age." She let out a shuddering breath that was almost a laugh. "It wasn't courage. It was just all I had left. It was enough." He took another step, closing the distance cautiously. The scent of blood, fear, and something else, something clean and sharp like winter starlight, filled his senses. "The runes on your skin, they are suppression bindings, council work." It wasn't a question. Her hand flew to her collarbone, covering the faintly glowing scars, a gesture of shame, of habit. "They keep me quiet," she whispered. "They are killing you," he stated bluntly. The magical poison was a slow, insidious rot. In this place, saturated with ancient power, the bindings were fracturing and the backlash was tearing her apart from the inside. She had hours, not days. Her silver gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw the despair beneath the defiance. "I know." Two simple words, heavy with the acceptance of a death sentence. It was that acceptance that decided him. He had seen warriors rage against their end. He had seen cowards weep. He had never seen someone so young hold their doom with such weary, clear-eyed resignation. They had not just caged her power, they had convinced her she deserved the cage. "Get up," he said, his tone shifting from observation to command. She stared, uncomprehending. "You are not dying tonight in this mud," he growled, the words leaving no room for argument. "Not while the ones who put you here sleep safely in their beds." A flicker of something, not hope but confusion, crossed her face. "Why? You were just watching. Why intervene now?" Kaelin looked past her into the heart of the Blackwood. "Because I am tired of watching the council erase beautiful, dangerous things." He looked back at her, his blue eyes glacial and intent. "And you, Alara of the Silver Eyes, are the most dangerous thing I have encountered in 100 years. I want to see what happens when you stop being quiet." He moved then, not giving her time to protest. In one fluid motion, he knelt and gathered her into his arms. She was shockingly light, a bundle of sharp bones and trembling cold. She stiffened, a gasp catching in her throat, but she did not fight him. Exhaustion had won out over fear. The moment his skin touched hers, the resonance exploded. It wasn't a pulse this time, it was a wave, a tsunami of raw, ancient recognition that slammed into his senses. Silver and blue, starlight and glacier ice, two lost melodies finding a harmony. A growl built in his chest, purely instinctual, possessive. "Mate," the wolf in him roared the truth. He clamped down on the instinct with iron will. "Not now, not like this." She was a wounded bird, not a queen to claim. Alara felt it too. Her eyes flew open, locking on his, filled with stunned shock. What was that?" "A question," he evaded, rising to his feet with her held securely against his chest. "One we will answer later. For now, sleep. The forest will not harm you while I carry you." He turned and began to move, not back toward the council lands, but north, toward his own borders, toward the forbidden line he had sworn never to cross for anyone. As he walked, the Blackwood reacted. Thorns retracted, branches bent aside, creating a path, roots settled, stilling their whispers. The ancient entity of the forest was not submitting to him, it was acknowledging what he carried, it was honoring the sliver of primordial power in his arms. Ilara's head lolled against his shoulder, her consciousness slipping away. Just before the darkness took her completely, her lips moved against the cold skin of his neck, her breath a ghost of sound. "They'll come for me," Kaelin's jaw hardened, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Let them come." He crossed the border marker, a simple, rune-carved stone, and the air changed. The oppressive, hungry magic of the Blackwood fell away, replaced by the clear, sharp, and fiercely protected energy of the Ironwood, his domain. He had broken his oath. He had declared war with a single step. In the distance, nestled against the base of a granite cliff, a solitary structure waited, the border keep. A secret, a sanctuary, a fortress, his. He looked down at the unconscious woman in his arms, her silver lashes dark against her pale skin, the cracked suppression runes glowing faintly on her skin like embers. "The game has changed, little wolf," he murmured to the night. "You are no longer a sacrifice, you are the prize. And I have just stolen you from the gods themselves." Far behind, in the Mistuad Pack village, Lyra stared into her cold hearth, her bond-sister oath burning like a brand on her soul. And in the high towers of the council, ravens took flight, their messages urgent, their meaning clear. The offering had not been accepted. The Alpha King had moved, and a storm, centuries in the making, was finally beginning to brew. Warmth, that was the first sensation to pierce the fog. Not the aggressive heat of the ritual fire, but a deep, steady warmth that seeped into her frozen bones. Ilara stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips as awareness returned, bringing with it a chorus of aches. Her ribs were a cage of dull pain, her head throbbed, and her skin felt strange. Tingly, too tight, as if something was pushing from the inside, trying to get out. She forced her eyes open. She was lying on a bed of thick, soft furs in a room made of stone and shadow. A fire crackled in a large hearth, casting dancing light over rough-hewn walls and simple, sturdy furniture. There were no windows, only a heavy wooden door, a fortress, not a home. The air smelled of wood smoke, pine, and something else, something clean and wild, like the air after a lightning strike. He was there, seated in a chair by the fire, a silhouette against the flames. He wasn't looking at her, he was staring into the embers, his profile sharp and unyielding as a mountain crag. He had shed any outer layers, wearing only simple trousers, and the firelight played over a torso mapped with scars and corded muscle. He was power made flesh. The silent king from the forest. Memory flooded back, the circle, the betrayal, the walk, the amber eyes, his impossible intervention. Panic, cold and swift, lanced through her. She pushed herself up on her elbows, the furs pooling around her waist. The movement was too quick. White-hot pain shot through her side, and she cried out, collapsing back with a gasp. Instantly he was there, not looming over her but kneeling beside the bed, his movement so fast it blurred. His blue eyes, now vividly clear in the firelight, scanned her face, assessing. "Your ribs are cracked, not broken," he said, his voice that same low rumble but softer here in the enclosed space. "The head wound is superficial. The real damage," his gaze dropped to the collar of the simple tunic he had dressed her in. It gaped slightly, revealing the top of the glowing, intricate scars on her collarbone, is woven deeper. Ilara clutched the furs to her chest, suddenly acutely aware of her vulnerability. "Where am I?" Her voice was stronger than she expected, though it shook. "The Ironwood, my territory." The border keep, each statement was a fact, dropped like a stone. "The council holds no power here." He finished, his tone leaving no room for debate. "This place is warded with magic older and far stronger than theirs. You are safe. Safe." The word felt foreign, dangerous. Nowhere had ever been safe. "Why did you bring me here?" The question she had asked in the forest hung between them, more urgent now. "You broke your neutrality, they'll see it as an act of war." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, it didn't reach his eyes. "Let them, you don't know them," the outburst surprised her. They don't just punish the guilty, they erase anyone who stands in their way. My entire pack, they'll use them, hurt them. Your pack, he interrupted, his voice turning to ice, shoved you into a death circle and turned their backs. They sold you for their own security. Their fate is not your burden to carry. The brutal truth of it stole her breath. She looked away, her eyes stinging. He was right, the bond was severed, the betrayal was complete, she had no pack. Then what is my burden? She whispered to the fur beneath her fingers. To live, he said it simply. To discover why a woman with the blood of the first wolves in her veins was being fed to the Blackwood like a lamb to slaughter. Her head snapped up. First wolves, that's a children's tale. A legend, is it? He rose and walked to a heavy wooden chest in the corner. He lifted the lid and drew out an object wrapped in aged, silvery hide. He brought it back and laid it on the furs beside her. It was a book, its cover etched with symbols that made her eyes water to look at. The Chronicle of Lines. My family has kept it hidden since the Purge. The Purge, 300 years ago, he said, his voice grim. The council, then newly formed, decided concentrated power was a threat. They hunted down every traceable descendant of the original Alpha lines, the first wolves. Men, women, children, they called it a cleansing for stability. He opened the book with reverent care. The pages were vellum, the script a flowing, beautiful runic text. They rewrote history, calling the first blood a corruption, a madness. They made monsters of saints to justify murder. His finger traced down a complex family tree through names lost to time. Silver eyes, he murmured. Not a curse, a marker, the sign of Ulrich's direct line. Ulrich, the first wolf who walked with the moon as his companion. He stopped, his finger rested on a name that branched off Ulrich's line, a lineage thought exterminated. The final entry was recent, too recent. Ilara's blood ran cold. She leaned forward, pain forgot. There in elegant script was a name she knew, her grandmother's name, and below it her mother S, and below that her own. Ilara, daughter of Anya, daughter of Kalia, of the line of Ulrich. The world tilted. The walls of the keep seemed to press in. All the whispers, the fear, the suppression. It wasn't because she was wrong, it was because she was right. She was the living proof of the council's greatest crime. She was the heir they had failed to kill. No, she breathed, shaking her head. This is a trick, a story. The resonance was not a story, Kaelin said, closing the book with a soft thud. I felt it, the forest felt it. You carry the oldest, purest alpha power in existence. You could, with a thought, command loyalty from any pack wolf. You could shatter council wards. Your very presence challenges their entire foundation of control. He looked at her, his blue eyes blazing with intensity. That is why they caged you. Not because you were weak, but because you were born to be a queen. Queen, the word echoed in the stone room, vast and terrifying. Ilara stared at the cover of the book, at the truth it contained. The little girl who had been told she was a mistake, the woman who had believed she was broken, she was neither. She was a secret, and secrets, once unearthed, have a terrible power. A sudden, searing heat erupted in her chest. It wasn't pain, it was a release, a valve bursting open. The suppression runes on her collarbone flashed a violent green and then cracked. A hairline fracture of pure silver light shone through. Ilara gasped, arching off the bed as her power, surged for the first time in her life. It was a river breaking a dam, vast and unstoppable. The fire in the hearth roared, shooting a column of flame toward the ceiling. The stone walls hummed. Outside, far away, a chorus of wolves howled, not in alarm but in recognition. Kaelin didn't move to restrain her. He watched his own power, a calm, deep ocean beside her tempest. Breathe, he commanded, his voice an anchor in the chaos. Don't fear it, it is you. As quickly as it came, the surge receded, forced back behind the fractured but still standing wall of runes. Ilara collapsed back, panting, her body trembling violently. Silver light still flickered beneath her skin like captured lightning. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes wide with terror and awe. I can't control it. You will learn, he said, absolute certainty in his tone, but first you must heal and we must prepare. For what? He turned his head as if listening to something beyond the stone, his expression hardened into that of a warrior. For the consequences, they felt that, the break in the suppression, the council's hounds have a scent now. He looked back at her and for the first time she saw not just a king but a strategist facing a coming battle. Your awakening has just begun, Ilara of Ulrich's line, and the wolves who thought you buried are about to learn they stirred a dragon. The scent of simmering herbs and wood smoke filled the border keep, a fragile blanket of normalcy over the ticking tension. Kaelin had tended to her wounds with a surprising, impersonal gentleness, his hands steady and sure. He'd spoken little, but his presence was a constant, solid thing in the shifting reality of her world. Ilara's mind reeled between the impossible truth in the ancient book and the searing, terrifying memory of the power that had briefly broken free. She felt like a glass vessel someone had tapped with a hammer, still whole but webbed with cracks, ready to shatter at the next touch. He had given her space, busying himself with reinforcing the wards around the keep, etching new runes into the doorframe, placing charged stones at the cardinal points. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator, every action efficient and purposeful. She watched him from the bed, wrapped in furs, feeling like a ghost in her own life. What happens when they come? She asked quietly, breaking the long silence. He didn't pause in his work. That depends on who they are. If it's your former pack sent to clean up their mess, they will be discouraged. If it's the Raven Guard, the Council's elite, we fight. Fight, her voice was small, there's only you. He finally looked at her, a glint of something feral in his blue eyes. There is only me, he corrected, as if that were an advantage, and I have held this border against worse than pampered council hunters for 100 years. This keep is a fortress and I am its wrath. The certainty in his voice should have been arrogance. Instead, it felt like geography, a simple, immutable fact like the mountain outside being made of stone. It sparked a tiny, defiant flame in her own chest. He believed they could stand. Should she? As dusk painted the world in shades of bruised purple and gray, the first warning came. Not a sound, but a change in pressure. The air in the keep grew heavy, thick with silent alarm. The runes Kaelin had etched into the doorframe began to glow with a soft, persistent blue light. Kaelin went perfectly still by the hearth, his head tilted. "They're here," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. 8 of them, skirting the main wards, professional. Ilara's heart leapt into her throat. She pushed herself upright, ignoring the stab of pain. What do we do? He moved to the chest, withdrawing not the massive blade she expected, but a set of strange, dark metal claws that he fitted over his knuckles. You stay behind me, you do not engage. Your power is a storm in a bottle, unleash it now, and you might bring this mountain down on top of us. He fastened the final strap and met her gaze. Do you trust me? The question was absurd. She had known him for less than a day. He was a king, a stranger, a force of nature, yet he had pulled her from the grave when his own laws demanded he leave her there. I don't know you, she answered honestly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a wise answer. Then trust that I want to see what you become, and for that you need to live. A heavy knock echoed through the keep, a polite, terrifying sound. Boom, boom, boom. Kaelin didn't bother to answer. He simply waited, a statue of coiled violence. The heavy oak door didn't burst open. It swung inward smoothly as if invited. 4 figures stood framed in the twilight, clad in the gray and silver of the Raven Guard, their faces obscured by helmets fashioned like beaked birds. 2 more flanked the doorway outside, and Ilara's blood turned to ice as she saw the final 2 figures step into the light behind them. Ronan and Lyra. Ronan looked as he always had, strong, solemn, handsome in a carved stone way. But his eyes, when they found her on the bed, held a complex storm of guilt and resolve. Lyra, however, was a shock. Her golden hair was braided back for travel, her face set in hard lines Ilara didn't recognize. She wore the light leathers of a tracker, not the dresses of a pack daughter. She met Alara's gaze, and there was no apology there, only a grim, determined focus. The lead guardsman removed his helmet. His face was sharp, ageless, and cold. Alpha King Kalen. An unexpected presence so far from your hall. This is my hall, Kalen replied, his voice a low vibration in the stone room. You are the unexpected presence. State your business and then remove yourselves from my land. We are here for the condemned, the guardsman said, his eyes sliding to Alara. Alara of Mistuad, her sentence must be carried to completion. The Blackwood did not take her, the law remains unfulfilled. Your law ends at my border, Kalen said, taking a single, deliberate step forward. The Raven Guard's hands went to their weapons. She is under my protection now. Ronan finally spoke, his voice strained. Alara, please, come quietly, don't make this harder, it's for the good of everyone. The betrayal somehow cut deeper here in this safe space, with him pleading for her surrender. My death is for the good of everyone. Her voice shook with a fury that surprised her. Your existence is a threat, Lyra snapped, stepping forward. The sound of her voice, once so familiar, now so harsh, was a physical blow. We're not monsters, Alara. We loved you, but you have to see it. The wardstones shatter when you weep. Animals go mad when you're angry. You carry a sickness, a power that consumes everything it touches. Her golden eyes were desperate. Coming with us, accepting the verdict, it's the only way to protect what's left of our home, of our people. You're protecting yourselves, Alara whispered, the truth crystal clear, from me. Lyra flinched but held her ground. Yes, and from the war you'll start if the council has to come for you here. She looked at Kalen with a mix of fear and disdain. He's using you, a pawn to provoke the council. He doesn't care about you. Kalen's laugh was a short, dark sound. And you who watched her be dragged to slaughter care so deeply. His gaze swept over them. You have 1 minute to turn and leave. After that, I stop asking. The lead guardsman's face tightened. You would violate the Northern Pact for one tainted girl. The pact was violated when you carved suppression runes into a child, Kalen growled, the first real heat entering his voice. 30 seconds. The tension snapped. The guardsman gave a sharp nod. Ronan looked anguished but drew a short blade. Lyra's hands came up, glowing with the faint green of binding magic, the same magic that had carved the runes. Alara's fear crested, then transformed. It didn't vanish, it solidified. It became a cold, sharp clarity. They were here to finish the job. Her heartbreak over Lyra, her disappointment in Ronan, it all burned away in the furnace of that understanding. A low hum started in her chest, an echo of the lullaby, a vibration of pure defiance. The Raven Guard moved as one, a blur of gray. Kalen moved faster. He didn't shift, he didn't need to. He was amongst them like winter's first wind, silent, devastating, and utterly final. The dark metal claws flashed, deflecting a blade, scraping against armor with a shriek of sparks. A guard lunged. Kalen pivoted, using the man's momentum to slam him into the stone wall with a sickening crunch. Another came from the side. Kalen caught his wrist, twisted, and the sound of breaking bone was loud in the sudden chaos. Ronan yelled, charging Kalen with his blade. Kalen disarmed him with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, sending the blade clattering across the floor, and backhanded him with a closed fist. Ronan dropped like a felled tree, unconscious. Through it all, Lyra was chanting, her hands weaving intricate patterns aimed at Alara. A coil of green energy shot across the room. Alara didn't think. She threw up her hands, not in a magical gesture, but in a simple, desperate block. The green energy struck her palms, and the fractured rune on her collarbone flared like a supernova. Silver light, raw and untamed, erupted from her skin in a shield of shimmering force. Lyra's binding spell shattered against it like glass hitting stone. Lyra staggered back, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. You see, she screamed at the remaining guards, you see what she is. Kalen finished with the last guard, standing amidst the groaning bodies, his breath steady, a thin line of blood on his cheek, the only sign he'd been in a fight. He looked at Lyra, who stood alone, trembling. "Leave," he said, the word a final judgment. "Take your fallen and your broken oaths. Tell the council the condemned is no more. Tell them a queen now stands in her place, and if they send anyone else," he took a step toward her and Lyra recoiled, "they had better send an army." Lyra's defiance crumpled. She looked from Kalen's implacable face to Alara, who still held her hands before her, silver light fading from her skin. The look in Lyra's eyes was no longer just fear. It was the dawning horror of realizing they hadn't caged a monster, they had created a legend. Without another word, she turned and fled into the gathering dark, leaving her defeated comrades behind. Silence descended, heavy and profound. Alara lowered her hands, her whole body trembling not from fear, but from the aftershock of power, of confrontation, of a final, painful severance. She looked at Kalen, standing amid the wreckage of her past. He wiped the blood from his cheek and met her gaze. The feral glint was gone, replaced by something akin to respect. "The first lesson," he said quietly, "is that you are not a victim. You are a weapon they tried to bury." He gestured to the door, to the world beyond. "The question is, what will you choose to strike?" The keep was cleansed of the intruders. Kalen had dragged the unconscious Raven guard to the tree line with chilling efficiency, a silent promise of worse fates should they return. Ronan had been deposited beside them, a symbol of broken bonds. The heavy door was barred once more, but the sanctity of the space was fractured. The outside world had forced its way in, and with it, a chilling certainty. This was only the beginning. Alara sat by the fire, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, though she wasn't cold. She was numb. The confrontation had been a whirlwind, but it was Lyra's face, the hardened mask of a stranger where her sister's smile used to be, that haunted the quiet moments. The echo of her words, a sickness, a power that consumes. "She believes it," Alara said aloud, her voice hollow in the stone room. Kalen, who was methodically checking his wards by the door, paused. "Of course she does. It's the lie she was raised on, the lie that keeps her safe, that absolves her of guilt. It is easier to fear a monster than to betray a sister." The logic was brutal, but it resonated. Alara looked down at her hands. They still tingled with the ghost of that silver light. What if part of it is true? What if this power is a sickness? I felt it. It was vast, hungry. I couldn't control it. "Control is not the first step," Kalen said, turning to face her. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "Understanding is. You have spent a lifetime being told the wolf inside you is a rabid dog to be chained. The first thing you must learn is that it is not a separate thing. It is you, your anger, your will, your passion, your strength given form. To fear it is to fear your own heart, and if my heart is destructive," she whispered, the old fears rising like ghosts. He pushed off the wall and came to sit in the chair opposite her. The firelight played over the stark planes of his face. "Then you learn its purpose. A storm is destructive. It also clears the air, waters the earth, and reminds the world of nature's power. Your power has a purpose, Alara. The first wolves were not tyrants, they were guides, they balanced the world. The council perverted that history because balanced power is their greatest threat." He was offering her a new story, not the cursed, broken girl, but a scion of something noble and lost. It was a tempting fantasy, but the weight of it was terrifying. "I don't know how to be that. You already are." He gestured to the space where she had shattered Lyra's binding spell. "You defended yourself not with trained magic, but with instinct. Your instinct was to protect, not to destroy. That tells you everything." Silence fell again, but it was a more comfortable one, the kind that exists between two people who have survived a skirmish together. Alara found her eyes drawn to the ancient book, still lying on the table. "My grandmother, Kalia. The book says she died in a border skirmish." Kalen's expression grew grimmer. The Chronicle records the official stories. My own family's archives tell a different tale. The border skirmish was a Raven Guard ambush. They had tracked her for years. She was the last known adult of your line before you. Your mother hid you, buried your scent, lived in fear, and died of a broken heart, some say, leaving you to be raised by those who saw your eyes as a curse to be managed, not a heritage to be honored. Each word was a piece of a puzzle, forming a picture of a life orchestrated by hidden hands. Her entire existence had been shaped by a secret war she never knew was being fought. Why tell me this now? It's a lot. Because the hunters will return, he said, his blue eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. And next time it will not be a retrieval party, it will be an extermination squad. You need to know what you're fighting for, not just for your life but for your right to exist. For the truth of your grandmother and her mother before her, you are not an accident, you are a legacy. The word legacy settled in her chest, heavy and warm. It was the opposite of taint. What do? We train, he said simply. Your body is healing, your spirit is awakening, but your will must become steel. The suppression runes are breaking down, we cannot stop that, but we can guide the awakening so it doesn't consume you. He stood up. First, we see what the forest thinks of you now. The ironwood, he nodded, my forest, it knows my blood, let us see if it recognizes yours. Hesitantly she stood, letting the blanket fall. The thought of going outside, of being under the open sky where ravens might be watching, sent a spike of fear through her. But the determination in Kaelin's gaze was contagious. He opened the heavy door and the cold, clean night air rushed in, scented of pine and frost. He led her not onto a path, but into the trees themselves. The ironwood was different from the blackwood. Where the blackwood felt hungry and ancient in a corrupt way, the ironwood felt old and stern, like a watchful grandfather. The trees were tall and straight, their bark like silvered armor. Close your eyes, Kaelin instructed, his voice low. Don't listen with your ears. Listen with the part of you that hummed the lullaby, the part that pushed back against Lyra's magic. Reach out. Ilara closed her eyes, feeling foolish. All she felt was the cold, the ache in her ribs, her own pounding heart. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to quiet the noise inside. She thought of her grandmother, Kaelia, a woman she never knew but whose blood she carried. She thought of the silver light not as a disease but as an inheritance. And then she felt it. A gentle pulse deep in the earth, then another like a heartbeat, a soft rustle of leaves that had nothing to do with the wind, a sense of attention. The forest was aware of her. She felt a curious, probing energy, neither friendly nor hostile, but assessing. It brushed against the fractured runes on her skin, and the silver light within her stirred in response, not with violence but with a kind of greeting. A single, perfect snowflake landed on her cheek. She opened her eyes. The forest looked the same and yet completely different. She could feel the life in it now, the sleeping animals in their burrows, the sap deep in the trees, the ancient magic slumbering in the stones. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and profoundly sacred. It sees you, Kaelin murmured, a note of awe in his own voice. He was watching not the forest, but her face. What does that mean? She breathed. It means you are not an intruder here, you are a forgotten daughter come home. He placed a hand on the trunk of a great oak. The ironwood accepts you. This is your sanctuary now as much as it is mine. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Ilara's eyes. She had never been accepted anywhere, never been home. This stern, silent forest offered her a belonging her own pack had denied. It was a fragile, terrifying gift. A distant howl pierced the night, not from the ironwood but from the direction of the blackwood. It was answered by another and another, a chorus of voices that spoke of pursuit, of packs being mobilized. The moment of peace shattered. Kaelin's hand fell from the tree, his face hardening into the mask of the Alpha King once more. They are rallying, he said. The council does not take defiance lightly. Your time for quiet learning is over. He turned to her, his gaze fierce. Tomorrow we begin. Not just to defend, but to become what they truly fear. We will forge a queen from the girl they abandoned." He offered her his arm, not as a king to a subject, but as a guide to a companion on a dark road. Ilara looked from his steady hand to the dark line of trees where the howls still echoed. The choice was clear: retreat into the shadows and wait for the end, or step forward into a terrifying new destiny. She took his arm. The cold metal of his vambrace was solid beneath her fingers. The howls on the wind were no longer just a threat, they were a challenge, and for the first time in her life, Ilara felt something stirring in answer. Not fear, not resignation. It was the quiet, steady beat of a war drum. The night passed in a brittle, watchful silence. Every rustle outside the keep's thick walls sounded like an approaching army. Ilara dozed fitfully, her dreams a chaotic tapestry of green fire, Lyra's accusing eyes, and a vast, silver wolf that watched her from a moonlit glade. Each time she jolted awake, she found Kalen in the same position, seated by the door, a living statue of vigilance, his blue eyes gleaming in the dark like chips of polar ice. His presence was no longer just intimidating, it was an anchor, the one solid thing in her upended world. At first light he moved. "Come," was all he said, throwing her a heavier tunic and a pair of boots lined with fur. "The forest is our classroom today." They ventured deeper into the ironwood, away from the keep, to a small clearing where the morning sun broke through the canopy in dusty golden shafts. The air was so crisp it hurt to breathe. "The power of the first wolves is not like common shifting," Kalen began, his tone that of a seasoned instructor. "It is not a skin you put on, it is an expression of your will, your emotions are its fuel, your control is its direction." Ilara stood nervously in the center of the clearing, feeling exposed. "You want me to summon it now? No, I want you to listen to it." He placed a hand on his own chest. "Close your eyes, find the silence between your heartbeats. In that silence you will feel it, a hum, a warmth, a pressure, that is the wolf waiting." She obeyed, closing her eyes. The world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing, the distant cry of a hawk, the thud of her heart. At first there was only the lingering ache and the ghost of fear. Then beneath it all she found it, not a wild beast but a deep, resonant presence, like a great sleeping cat curled around the core of her being. It was powerful, ancient, and surprisingly calm. "I feel it," she whispered. "Good, now think of a simple, clear emotion, not rage or fear, they are storms. Start with a still pool, think of determination, the feeling you had when you walked into the Blackwood." Ilara focused. She recalled the taste of rain and blood, the feel of the mud under her feet, the sight of the flames at her back. But more than that, she recalled the cold, clear decision: "I will not give you my tears," that steely resolve. The warmth in her core stirred. It flowed outward, a gentle tide. She felt a tingling in her fingertips, a subtle sharpening of her senses. The scent of pine became a complex symphony of resin and life. She could hear the scritch of a beetle under bark 50 feet away. "Open your eyes," Kalen commanded softly. She did. The world was brighter, sharper, colors were more vivid. She looked at her hands. Tiny, almost invisible silver filaments, like threads of starlight, shimmered just beneath her skin for a second before fading. "You tempered it with purpose," Kalen noted, a hint of approval in his voice. "That is the foundation. Control is not suppression, it is partnership." He spent the next hours leading her through exercises, focusing her will to make a single leaf tremble on a branch, directing her enhanced senses to track the path of a squirrel through the high canopy. It was frustrating, delicate work. The power was like a headstrong river, it wanted to flow, to roar. Containing it to a trickle was exhausting. During a break, sitting on a fallen log, Ilara finally asked the question that had been burning in her since the Chronicle: "The resonance between us. What does it mean?" Kalen was silent for a long moment, looking at the play of light on the forest floor. "It means our bloodlines recognize each other," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "My line, the Frostfangs, are also ancient, though not as old as yours. We were the shield to the first wolf's spear. protectors. When a Frostfang and a descendant of Ulrich are near, their powers harmonize. It amplifies both. It is a rare thing, so rare the council likely believed it impossible. Harmonize, she repeated, testing the word. It felt significant. Is that why you felt compelled to help me? He met her gaze then, and his eyes were unguarded for a fleeting second. The resonance was the alarm bell. What I saw, your defiance, that was what compelled me. He looked away, his walls sliding back into place. It is a tactical advantage. Together we are stronger than the sum of our parts. The council will not expect it. It was a practical answer, a king's answer. But it didn't quite explain the depth of the connection she had felt, that sense of a missing piece clicking into place. She let it go, for now. The afternoon sun was waning when the lesson turned. Now, Kalen said, his posture shifting into something more combative. We test your instincts, not your control. Do not think, just react. Before she could ask what he meant, he moved. Not to strike her, but he swept his arm in a wide arc, sending a barrage of fallen leaves and forest debris flying toward her face with unnatural force. Instinct screamed. Ilara threw up her arms and pushed back with her will. A silvery, transparent shield of force shimmered into existence inches from her skin. The debris shattered against it and fell harmlessly to the ground. Before she could even gasp, Kalen was a blur. He came low, a sweeping leg aimed to trip her. Her body moved without conscious thought. She leapt, the power in her legs propelling her higher than she ever thought possible, clearing his swing effortlessly. She landed in a crouch, heart hammering, energy crackling around her. He didn't stop. He pressed the attack, a relentless but controlled assault, teaching her through motion how to dodge, how to use her newfound speed, how to let the wolf's instincts guide her body. It was terrifying and exhilarating. She wasn't fighting him, she was dancing with a hurricane, learning its patterns to avoid being swept away. Finally, he stopped, not even winded. She was panting, sweat cooling on her skin, but a wild, bright energy sang in her veins. She had done it. She had used it without losing herself. Good, he said, a genuine smile touching his lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger, almost approachable. The wolf knows how to survive, you must learn to trust it. As they walked back to the keep in the lavender twilight, a new sound reached them. Not howls, but something more organized. The distant, metallic clang of construction, the shouts of many men. It came from the direction of the Blackwood border. Kalen's smile vanished. He moved to a high ridge, pulling Ilara down beside him to peer through the trees. In the distance, in the no-man's land between the Blackwood and the Ironwood, torches were being lit. Tents were rising. The glint of armor was unmistakable. It wasn't an army yet, it was an outpost. A forward camp. The council wasn't just sending hunters, they were building a gate on his doorstep. They're digging in, Kalen murmured, his voice grim. They mean to siege us, to starve us out or draw us into a fight on their terms. Ilara's newfound confidence shriveled. The scale of it was overwhelming. What can we do against a camp? Kalen watched the pinpricks of light for a long, tense moment. Then he looked at her and the feral glint was back, mixed with something like calculation. We don't fight the camp, he said slowly, a dangerous plan forming in his eyes. We remind them why they fear the dark. He turned to her, his gaze intense. You have felt the forest, you know its heartbeat. I need you to listen again, deeper. I need you to find the oldest, most stubborn root of the ironwood, the one that reaches under their new walls. He was not asking her to fight with claws and fang, he was asking her to fight with the land itself. Can you do that? He asked, the fate of their stand hanging on her answer. Ilara looked from the distant enemy lights to the solemn, ancient trees around her. She felt their quiet strength, their deep roots. She felt the silver wolf inside her, no longer sleeping, but alert and waiting. She wasn't a warrior, not yet, but she was of Ulrich's line, and this forest was her home. She took a deep breath, let the power hum in her core, and met his challenging stare. Show me the way. The plan was insanity. It was also their only move. Kaelin's strategy wasn't about brute force, it was about sending a message so profound it would rattle the council to its bones. They would not attack the camp, they would make the land itself reject it. Back in the keep, he spread a rough map etched on cured leather across the table. The soil here, he pointed to a spot just inside the ironwood border, is threaded with ley lines, veins of elemental power. The first wolves could commune with them, direct them in small ways. It's how they fostered growth, healed blight, or caused tremors. Ilara stared at the map, then at her own hands. You want me to cause a tremor? No, I want you to whisper to the roots. His eyes were fierce in the candlelight. The camp's latrines will be here, their water source here. They'll try to ward the ground, but their magic is rigid, formulaic. It speaks in commands. The old magic, it listens to requests, to songs. You will hum your lullaby not to calm a beast, but to awaken the sleeping spirit of the stone and root beneath their feet. The idea was both beautiful and terrifying, to use the gentle song of her grandmother as a weapon. What if I can't? What if it doesn't listen? It listened in the clearing, he said, his voice unwavering. It accepted you, this is just a louder conversation. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the contact brief but grounding. You are not commanding. You are reminding the land that invaders have come and asking for its aid. There is a righteousness in that which their sterile wards cannot comprehend. As midnight draped the world in its deepest black, they moved. Clad in dark, non-reflective clothes, they became shadows among shadows. Kaelin led the way with a predator's silence, and Ilara followed, her newly heightened senses straining against the dark. The silver presence within her was alert, not frightened, treating this as a night hunt. They crept to the very edge of the ironwood, where the trees gave way to a rocky meadow that sloped down toward the newly established camp. Dozens of tents formed orderly rows, watchfires burned, the silhouettes of sentries patrolled. It looked permanent, impregnable. Kaelin pointed to a specific, massive old willow whose branches wept toward the enemy camp. Its roots run deep and far. Anchor yourself there. Feel for its heartbeat, then send your plea along its threads. I will guard your back. Ilara's mouth was dry as ash. She nodded, unable to speak. She slipped from the tree line and darted to the willow, pressing her back against its gnarled trunk. The moment she touched it, a wave of calm familiarity washed over her. This tree remembered. It remembered when the land was whole, before borders and councils. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sight of the enemy camp. She placed her palms flat against the cool, ridged bark. She found her breath, then the silence between heartbeats, then the humming presence of her power. This time she didn't pull it inward. She pushed it gently into the tree. A welcoming warmth flowed back. She saw images not with her eyes but with her soul, seasons passing, rains feeding deep roots, the gentle pressure of deer sleeping in its shade. The land was alive, patient, and deeply connected. Then she pushed her intent forward, along the root threads that stretched like subterranean rivers. She didn't send words but feelings, a sense of violation, of foreign nails driven into sacred flesh, of poison being poured on a sleeping face. She poured her own memory of the execution circle into that shared consciousness, the feeling of being trapped, defiled, and then she began to hum, the same old runic lullaby, but now it was not a comfort for herself. It was a lament for the wounded land, a call to remember its own strength. For a long moment nothing happened, doubt clawed at her. She was a fool, playing at magic while an army camped a stone's throw away. Then the earth sighed. It was a faint vibration, a deep, subterranean groan that she felt through the roots, not heard. The ground beneath the distant camp shifted. It wasn't an earthquake, it was a subtle, stubborn rearrangement. At the edge of the camp, a newly dug latrine trench collapsed in on itself with a soft, sucking rumble. The carefully dug well at the center of the camp clouded abruptly, not with mud, but with a fine, glittering silt that made the water undrinkable. And along the perimeter, where the guards had driven iron stakes for their tents, the ground seemed to soften. One stake tilted drunkenly, then another, tents sagged, shouts of confusion rose from the camp, lanterns swung, searching for an enemy that wasn't there. Ilara kept humming, pouring her will, her request into the roots. A massive root, thick as a man's thigh, broke the surface 20 feet inside the camp with a sound like a cracking whip tearing through the floor of a supply tent. More shouts, now edged with panic. This wasn't an attack. It was the land itself turning hostile. A sentry, his eyes wide with superstitious fear, pointed toward the ironwood. It's the forest, the cursed forest retaliates. Kalen materialized at her side, his hand on her arm. Enough, he whispered. The message is sent. More will break their morale faster than any blade. She let the song die in her throat, severing the connection with a gentle mental pull. The earth's groaning settled, but the damage was done. The camp was in disarray, their sense of security shattered. They had expected a wolf to attack. They hadn't expected the very ground to rebel. As they melted back into the ironwood, Ilara trembled not from exhaustion but from a profound, awe-filled shock. She had done that, not with fury, but with a whispered song. The power wasn't just in her, it was a conversation with the world. Once they were safely deep within the trees, Kalen stopped and looked at her. In the dappled moonlight, his expression was unreadable. What you did that has not been done for centuries. The council's records call it geomancy and label it a lost heretical art. A slow, fierce pride dawned in his eyes. They were right to fear your blood, Ilara. You don't just carry power, you speak the oldest language of this world. The weight of his words, of what she had just accomplished, settled on her. It was no longer about survival. She had in one night become a symbol. A living proof that the council's control was an illusion, that the old ways were not dead, only sleeping. And as they returned to the keep, a new sound joined the distant panic of the camp. A lone wolf howled from the highest peak in the ironwood. It was a clear, triumphant sound that echoed through the valleys. It was answered not from the camp but from deep within the forest, wolves who had been silent for generations, now lifting their voices in a chorus of recognition. The land had a new voice, and it had just declared its allegiance. Inside the keep, as the fire was stoked, Ilara looked at the chronicle of lines, now understanding its truth in her bones. She was not just a descendant, she was a catalyst. The war wasn't coming. It had begun the moment she hummed a lullaby to the roots. And the battlefield was not a plain, but the soul of the land itself. The council had tried to bury a secret. Instead, they had planted a seed, and in the cold, dark soil of the ironwood, that seed was now erupting into a forest of defiance. 3 days passed. The forward camp did not advance. It floundered. Reports, gleaned by Kalen from the whispers of the wind and the scouting of his own loyal beasts, spoke of a crumbling morale. Wells refused to stay clear. Tents slumped overnight as if the earth sighed them away. Sentries reported hearing mournful songs in the rustling leaves, seeing silver shadows that vanished when challenged. The ironwood was no longer just a territory, it was a living, breathing enemy. The council's soldiers, trained for steel and sorcery, had no manual for a war against the land's own will. Within the keep, a new rhythm was established. Mornings were for physical training, building Ilara's strength, teaching her to move with the fluidity of her awakening power. Afternoons were for deeper communion, learning to extend her senses through the root networks to listen to the forest's moods. She learned to distinguish the slow, contented pulse of a healthy glade from the irritated hum of a place where council magic had brushed too close. Kalen was a relentless but patient teacher. He pushed her to her limits but never passed them. He spoke little of himself, of his century of rule, of the betrayal that had forged his neutrality. But in the quiet moments when they shared a simple meal by the fire, Ilara saw glimpses of the man behind the king, a weariness in his eyes that had nothing to do with sleep, a dry, unexpected humor that surfaced like a trout in a still pool. On the 4th day the rain returned, not a storm but a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the world to mist and melancholy. It was on this gray afternoon that a lone figure approached the keep, not with stealth or threat, but with a slow, trudging step. A scout, a young wolf from a distant, neutral pack loyal to Kalen, arrived, soaked and shivering, with a sealed message and a verbal report that turned the air cold. "The council has convened the full raven moot," the scout panted, accepting a blanket. "All 9 elders. They've declared the Alpha King an oath-breaker and a harborer of existential corruption." He glanced at Alara with a mix of awe and fear. "They've issued a blood proclamation." Kalen went very still. Against the girl," the scout said, his voice dropping. "And against any pack or individual who offers her aid or sanctuary. They've authorized the use of purge protocols." The words hung in the damp air like poison gas. Purge protocols, the legal framework used 3 centuries ago to justify the extermination of the first bloodlines. They were making it official. They weren't just hunting a fugitive, they were erasing a bloodline again and declaring anyone who stood in their way equally condemned. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. "What does that mean?" "It means," Kalen said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "they have given every ambitious pack lord, every greedy beta, and every fanatical zealot in the Northern Territories a license to hunt you. For glory, for council favor, or to cleanse their own perceived sins. It turns you from a political problem into a religious crusade." The scope of the hatred was staggering. She was no longer just a threat to the council. She was a symbol of sin to be purged from the world. "There's more, my king," the scout hesitated, looking miserable. "They've sent emissaries to the surrounding packs. To the Frostmane, the Stoneclaw, the Riverfin. They're demanding hostages of goodwill to ensure continued loyalty during the cleansing." Kalen's fist slammed onto the table, making the wood groan. "Hostages. They're holding families to force the packs to join their hunt or stay out of it." It was a masterstroke of political terror. It paralyzed potential allies. The scout nodded grimly. "The message, sire." He handed over a scroll sealed with black wax and a raven's feather. Kalen broke the seal and read, his expression growing colder with each line. He finished and let the scroll fall to the table. "They offer terms," he said, his voice hollow. "A summit at the Standing Stones on the neutral ground of the High Pass in 3 days' time. To discuss a peaceful resolution." Ilara's heart leapt with a fragile, desperate hope. "Peace. A trap," Kalen snarled, picking up the scroll again as if to tear it but stopping himself. "Or a performance. They know I won't hand you over. But by offering peace publicly, they paint me as the intractable warmonger when I refuse. They win the narrative, and if I do go," he looked at her, his blue eyes bleak, "they will have archers in the rocks, they will have magic prepared. It will be an ambush disguised as diplomacy." The tiny hope withered and died. Of course, there was no peace with those who had already written your eradication into law. "So we don't go," Alara said, trying to sound firm. "We have to go." The statement surprised her. Kalen paced before the fire. "If we hide, they tell the world we are monsters lurking in the dark, afraid of the light of truth. Their lies become fact. We must go. We must stand in the light on their chosen ground and show the world exactly what they are so afraid of." "But you said it's a trap." "It is," he agreed, a fierce, calculating light entering his eyes, "but we will spring it on our terms. They expect a king and his frightened, feral secret. They will not expect a queen who has learned to speak to stone and root." He stopped pacing and faced her. "This is your trial, Alara, not of combat but of presence. Can you stand before the architects of your misery, before the wolves who have bought the lies and not show fear? Can you let them see the truth of what you are? Not a monster, but a living piece of the history they tried to murder." The challenge was terrifying, to walk into the lion's den to be stared at, judged, hated. What if the power? "You will control it," he stated, as if commanding the sun to rise, "because you must." This is the first move in the real war, the war for the hearts and minds of the packs. We must give them an alternative to the Council's fear. We must give them you. The rain tapped a gentle, relentless rhythm on the stone roof, a summit, a trap. A stage. In 3 days she would have to step out of the protective shadow of the ironwood and into the glaring, hostile light of the world that had condemned her. Kaelin retrieved the scroll, his gaze distant. We will go to the standing stones. And we will show them that the girl they abandoned. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of the silver wolf, proud and unbroken. Has returned not for vengeance, but to reclaim what was stolen. Not just her life, but the truth. He crushed the scroll in his hand. Let them set their trap. We will bring the mountain down with us. The 2 days before the summit were a whirlwind of grim preparation. Kaelin drilled her relentlessly, but the lessons changed. No more root whispering or defensive shields. Now it was about poise, about stillness, about holding the vast, humming power inside her not as a hidden secret, but as a quiet, radiant mantle. They will try to provoke you, Kaelin said, circling her in the clearing as a fine, cold mist fell. The seer will say something vile about your mother, a guard will smirk. Lyra might be there, you must feel nothing they can see. Your anger, your grief, they are fuel for the wolf, but you must bank that fire. Let it glow in your eyes, but never let it crack your composure. You are not a reactive creature. You are a fact, like the mountains. Do mountains flinch when birds squawk at them? He taught her to walk not with a warrior's stride, but with the unconscious grace of one who knew the earth would rise to meet her footfall. He taught her to meet a gaze and hold it, not in challenge, but in unblinking acknowledgement. He even produced garments from the ancient chest, not armor, but clothes fit for a sovereign. For him, a tunic of dark gray wool edged with intricate, frost-blue embroidery that mirrored the patterns of his scars. For her, a simple dress the color of twilight, over which went a supple leather jerkin etched with tiny, shimmering runes that felt like starlight to the touch. On the eve of the summit, as they prepared by firelight, Kaelin brought out one final item, a circlet. It was not gold or gemstone, but seemingly woven from live, silvery willow and frosted ironwood twigs, delicate yet impossibly strong. In its center rested a single, teardrop-shaped moonstone that held a captured swirl of inner light. "This was my mother S," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. She was a believer in the old ways. She always said it waited for a queen who could hear the forest sing. He didn't ask, he simply held it out. Alara stared at it, her throat tight, to where it was to accept everything. The lineage, the title, the war, it was to step into the story fully. She thought of her grandmother, Kaelia, who had died running. She thought of her own mother, who had lived and died in hiding. This circlet was the opposite of hiding. She bent her head. With a surprising gentleness, he placed it upon her brow. It was cool, and the moment it touched her skin, the moonstone flared softly, its inner light pulsing once in time with her heartbeat. A gentle, affirming energy flowed from it, steadying her nerves. "Remember," Kaelin said, his hands lingering for a second on her shoulders, "you are Ulrich's daughter. You do not need to prove anything to them. Your existence is the proof. Your presence is the argument." Dawn on the day of the summit was a somber, gray affair. They left the ironwood not as stealthy shadows, but openly, walking a disused hunter's path that led up into the barren, wind-scoured rocks of the high pass. The standing stones were a place of ancient truce, a circle of 10 megaliths older than packs or councils, where the magic of the land enforced a fragile peace. Violence within the circle was said to bring the mountain's wrath. As they climbed, Alara saw them. Figures lining the ridges above the stone circle. Dozens, hundreds, pack alphas and their betas, warriors, and curious onlookers drawn by the blood proclamation and the scandal of the Alpha King's defiance. A sea of wary, hostile faces, her steps faltered. Kaelin's hand found the small of her back, a brief, steadying pressure. "Eyes forward," he murmured. "Look at the stones, they have stood for millennia, our drama is a blink to them." She fixed her gaze on the circle of towering monoliths ahead, their tops lost in the low clouds. As they entered the open approach, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Whispers slithered like snakes. "Silver Eyes, the tainted one, the king has truly lost his mind." In the center of the stone circle, the council of ravens awaited. All 9 elders, clad in their formal black and silver robes, their faces hidden behind exquisite, cruel raven masks. Flanking them were 2 full ranks of raven guard, their polished armor glaring even in the diffuse light. And there, to the right of the High Seer, stood Lyra and Ronan. Lyra's face was pale, set in rigid lines. Ronan would not look up at all. Kaelin and Alara passed between the outer stones, and the moment they crossed the threshold, the air changed. It became still, heavy with ancient magic. The whispers from the ridge fell silent, as if the stones themselves demanded respect. The High Seer stepped forward, her mask's empty eye sockets fixed on them. Alpha King Kaelin. "You come to a place of peace, yet you bring the source of war with you." Her rasping voice was amplified by the circle, carrying to every ear on the mountain. "I bring a witness to your crimes, High Seer," Kaelin replied, his voice calm but carrying the same weight. "And I come to hear these peaceful terms you offered." The seer's masked head tilted. "The terms are simple: surrender the abomination, submit to council judgment for your oath-breaking. In return, the blood proclamation will be rescinded, the hostages will be released, peace will be restored." "And the fate of the abomination?" Kaelin asked, though they all knew the answer. "Purification," the seer said smoothly. "A swift return to the earth from which such corrupted power sprang." Alara felt a hot spike of fear, but she locked it down, imagining it sinking into the mountain beneath her feet. She kept her face still, her silver eyes fixed on the seer's mask. "She is not corrupted power," Kaelin said, his voice rising slightly, not in anger but in proclamation. "She is Alara, daughter of Anya of the line of Ulrich, the last living descendant of the first wolves, whom your predecessors murdered and whose history you rewrote." A ripple of shock went through the crowd on the ridges. The line of Ulrich, that was a myth, a ghost story. "Lies," the seer hissed, a crack in her composure. "A desperate fairy tale to justify harboring a freak of nature, is it?" Kaelin's voice cut through hers. He didn't shout, he let the silence after his question hang. Then he turned his head not to the council but to the gathered packs on the ridges. "You have all felt the unrest in the land. The trembling wards, the strange growth, the dreams of wolves you've never seen. That is not corruption, it is an echo. It is the land itself stirring at the return of its rightful child." He was speaking directly to the people, over the heads of the council. It was a brilliant, dangerous move. "Enough," another elder, his mask adorned with jet feathers, stepped forward. "This is heresy and sedition. You present no proof but the word of a mad king and the eerie eyes of a condemned girl." Now Kaelin looked at Alara. It was her moment, the moment to be a fact. She took a single, deliberate step forward into the very center of the standing stones. She felt the ancient power here, similar to the ironwood but far older, more austere. She opened herself to it just a little, letting her own power hum in harmony. The moonstone in her circlet glowed brighter. She did not look at the accusing elder, she looked at the stones around her. And then she did the thing she had practiced. She let her power flow, not in a wave, but in a gentle, radiating pulse. A pulse of pure, clean presence, of first blood. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Every wolf on the mountain, regardless of pack, felt it in their bones. A pull, a call, a deep, instinctual recognition that bypassed thought and went straight to the primal core of what they were. It wasn't domination, it was homecoming. A reminder of what they had been before politics and fear. The Raven Guard shifted uneasily. The council elders stiffened. On the ridge, a low, collective murmur rose, not of anger, but of awe and confusion. Lyra, within the circle, took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her chest, her golden eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. She wasn't looking at a sick sister. She was looking at the origin of her own soul. Ilara finally spoke. Her voice was clear, quiet, yet it carried to the farthest listener, aided by the magic of the circle. "I am not a lie," she said, her silver gaze sweeping slowly across the masked council. "You are." The three words hung in the sacred air, a stark, undeniable challenge. The trap had been sprung. But it was the hunters who now stood exposed in the center of their own snare, as the very foundation of their authority was called a lie before the entire world. The summit was no longer about terms, it was about truth, and for the first time in 300 years the council had no ready answer. The silence in the standing stones was absolute, profound, and deafening. The challenge, "I am not a lie, you are," did not echo. It was absorbed by the ancient monoliths, digested, and reflected back as a heavy, judgmental stillness. The assembled packs on the ridges were not just watching a political dispute, they were witnessing a seismic crack in the bedrock of their world. The High Seer was the first to break. A tremor went through her robed figure. "You dare," her voice was a strangled scrape, losing its polished menace. "You stand in this sacred circle and spew the vilest poison. Is truth poison?" Kaelin's voice cut in, calm as a frozen lake. He remained a pace behind Ilara, a king allowing his queen the stage. "Then let us have more of it. Produce your own chronicle. Show the gathered alphas the lineage you claim she corrupts. Read them the true account of the purge, not the sanitized scrolls you teach our pups." The council elders exchanged frantic, masked glances. They could not. Those records were ash, burned by their own hands centuries ago. Another elder, this one with a mask of tarnished silver, stepped forward, trying a new tactic. "This is a distraction, a parlor trick of ancient magic. The blood proclamation stands because her very existence is a threat to stability. Look at her, she cannot even control the power that leaks from her." He pointed a dramatic, gloved finger at Ilara. It was a mistake. The accusation of lack of control was meant to provoke a reaction, to make her flinch, to spark the corruption for all to see. Ilara felt the surge of indignation, the silver wolf within rising with a snarl, but she heard Kaelin's voice in her mind, "Bank the fire." She did not flinch, she did not snarl. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath and did the opposite. She focused. She pulled the stirring power inward, not to suppress it, but to refine it, to show control. She extended her hand, palm up. From her skin, not with a violent flash, but with the gentle unfurling of a moonflower, a sphere of soft, silver light coalesced. It hovered above her palm, pulsing gently in time with her heartbeat. Within it, tiny motes of light swirled like a captured galaxy. It was beautiful, serene, and radiated an immense, tranquil power. Then, with a thought, she let the sphere stretch and reshape. It became the form of a running wolf, sleek and perfect, then a soaring raven, then a blooming frost lily. Each transformation was seamless, effortless, a display of absolute mastery over the terrifying force they called a corruption. The gathered packs gasped. This was not the magic of the council, rigid, utilitarian, harsh. This was magic as art, as nature, as something sacred and whole. "You call this a threat?" Ilara asked, her voice still quiet, but now ringing with a subtle, undeniable authority. She let the light dissolve into a shower of sparks that vanished before they touched the ground. "You fear this beauty?" The silver-masked elder recoiled as if struck. The seer was trembling with palpable rage. Their narrative was crumbling before their eyes, and they had no weapons that worked here. Swords were useless. Their lies were being exposed. Their authority, built on fear and fabricated history, was evaporating in the face of a calm girl with starlight in her hands. It was then that Lyra made her move. She lunged forward, not toward Ilara, but toward Kaelin, her face a mask of frantic, misguided loyalty. "You've bewitched them all," she screamed, her binding magic flaring green in her hands. "You and your monster," but Ronan was faster. He moved not to attack, but to intercept. He caught Lyra's wrist before her magic could be unleashed. "Lyra, no." His voice was a hoarse shout filled with an agony they all could hear. "Look at her, just look." He forced Lyra to turn, to truly look at Alara, who stood bathed in the solemn light of the standing stones, the moonstone crown gleaming, her expression one of pity, not hatred. Lyra's struggle ceased, her magic sputtered and died. She looked at Alara, and for the first time since the betrayal she truly saw. She saw not a distorted reflection of a sister, but the sister herself, magnified, perfected, and ascended to a place Lyra's fear could never comprehend. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a devastating, hollow grief. She sank to her knees, a silent sob racking her shoulders. The most vocal instrument of the council's lies had just been shattered by its own dissonance. The display was the final crack in the council's facade. The Raven Guard looked to their masters for orders, but the masked elders were paralyzed, a council of statues with nothing to decree. Kaelin seized the moment. He stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Alara, addressing the ridges, the packs, the world. "You have seen. You have felt the truth in your blood. The council's peace is a cage. Their stability is a lie built on graves. They offer you fear and hostages. I offer you a choice." He gestured to Alara, "A return to what we were meant to be. Not fractured packs cowering from shadows, but a united people, strong in our true heritage. The line of Ulrich lives. Will you stand with the ghosts and their jailers, or with the future?" He wasn't just defending her anymore. He was launching a rebellion. A deep, guttural roar answered him. It came from the ridge where the Frostmane pack stood, their alpha, a grizzled old warrior with eyes like flint, stepping to the edge. "The council holds my son hostage," he bellowed, his voice thick with fury. "But I will not kneel to blackmailers who fear a girl's light. Frostmane stands with the king. Like the first pebble of an avalanche it started. Riverfin stands," shouted another. "Stoneclaw stands with Ulrich's blood." The shouts came not from every pack, some hung back, terrified, loyal to the devil they knew, but from enough, a critical mass. The council's monolithic control was broken. Within the circle, the High Seer found her voice shrill with desperation. "This is treason, you will all be purged. Every one of you," but the threat, once ultimate, now sounded hollow, pathetic. The magic of the standing stones seemed to reject her venom. The air hummed with a new energy, the energy of a paradigm shifting. Kaelin looked down at the kneeling council, his blue eyes like chips of Arctic ice. "Your summit is over, your terms are rejected, your proclamation is void." He turned, offering his arm to Alara. "We are leaving. And if a single arrow flies from these rocks, if a single spell is cast, the mountain will not be the only thing that falls today." It was not a boast, it was a prophecy. Together they turned their backs on the council, the ultimate insult, and walked slowly, deliberately out of the stone circle. No one moved to stop them. The Raven Guard stood frozen. The elders were impotent in their rage. The packs on the ridges watched in stunned silence as the two figures, crowned in frost and starlight, walked unscathed through the heart of the trap and back down the path toward the ironwood. They had not just survived the summit, they had won it. They had exposed the lie, shattered the narrative, and sparked a revolution. But as they descended, the cold wind biting at their faces, Alara felt no triumph. Only the immense, crushing weight of the crown on her brow and the hopes of thousands now resting on her shoulders. The girl was gone, the queen had been born in a circle of stones, and her reign would be forged in the fire of the war she had just declared. The ironwood, upon their return, felt different. It was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a fortress buzzing with a new, electric energy. Word of the summit spread like wildfire through magical means and wolf song. By the time Kaelin and Alara crossed back into its protective embrace, the first refugees were already arriving, small groups, families, and lone wolves from the packs that had declared for the king. They came carrying little but fear, hope, and tales of council retribution already beginning. The Frostmane Alpha's son had been found dead in his cell, a suicide. A Riverfen elder who spoke too loudly in support had disappeared. The council was responding to its humiliation not with retreat, but with swift, brutal terror, aiming to strangle the rebellion in its cradle. Kaelin's border keep became a command post. He shed the mantle of the quiet, solitary king and became a general, organizing the newcomers, setting patrols along the expanded perimeter, meeting with the newly arrived alphas in tense, urgent councils. Ilara watched him, awed by the sheer force of his will as he forged order from the chaos. Her role was different but no less vital. She was the symbol, the living heart of their cause. The refugees, especially the children and the elders, looked at her with a mix of terror and reverence. The silver-eyed queen, to them she was not a person but a legend made flesh. At first she shrank from it, overwhelmed. But Kaelin found her one evening, hiding in the small, quiet space behind the keep where the ancient willow stood. "They don't need a warrior from you right now," he said, leaning against the tree. "They need to see that you are real. That you are not a destructive force but a protective one. Walk among them. Let them see your eyes. Let them hear your voice. Your presence is a shield for their courage." So she did. She moved through the makeshift camps that were springing up under the ironwood's boughs. She helped an old she-wolf bind a wound. She sat with children who stared in wonder and sang them the same runic lullaby that had calmed the Blackwood's beasts. She didn't speak of war or bloodlines. She spoke of the forest, of its protection, of home. And as she did, the fear in their eyes softened into something else, a fierce, desperate loyalty. One afternoon, a young messenger, a gangly boy from the Stoneclaw pack, sprinted into the main clearing, his face ashen. "My king, my queen," scouts report a host, marching from the council's spire. Not just Raven Guard, they've mustered the levy. A cold dread settled in the clearing. The levy, every pack, by ancient and despised treaty, was required to send a contingent of fighters to the council's army in times of grave threat. The council was forcing the packs to fight their own brothers, to choose between their hostages and their new allies. It was the cruelest possible move. Kaelin's face was granite. Numbers, over 1,000, maybe 2, they march under the Black Raven banner. They'll be at the edge of the Blackwood in 4 days. 1,000, against their few hundred refugees, warriors, and Kaelin's own elite guard. The numbers were impossible. Despair threatened to swallow the camp. Ilara felt it, a palpable wave of terror. She saw the hope she had kindled guttering out. They could not win a conventional battle. That night in the command council, Kaelin, Ilara, and the 3 allied alphas, the mood was grim. Strategies were proposed and discarded. A fighting retreat deeper into the mountains, they'd be hunted, a desperate charge. It would be a slaughter. Ilara listened silently, her mind not on troop movements but on the feel of the roots beneath her feet, the sigh of the trees, the sleeping power of the land. The levy was a blade, they were a sapling. A sapling could not stop a blade, but a mountain could. "We don't meet the blade," she said quietly, interrupting a debate about defensive lines. All eyes turned to her. The alphas looked skeptical. Kaelin's gaze was intent, curious. "We break the arm that holds it," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "The levy marches because they are compelled, by fear for their families, by treaty, by the council's lies." She looked at Kaelin. "You showed me that truth is a weapon. We used it at the summit. We must use it on the march." "How?" grumbled Borin, the Frostmane Alpha. "Shout the truth at them as they charge. They'll cut us down while we're talking." "Not at them," Ilara said, a plan, wild and fragile, forming in her mind. "To them. In the one place the council cannot control, in their dreams." Silence fell. Then Kaelin began to smile, a slow, dangerous smile of understanding. The song of roots. You can't send words, but you can send feelings, memories, truths. "The standing stones amplified my presence for all to feel," Ilara said, her heart pounding with the audacity of it. "The ley lines are like roots across the territory. If I can tap into them at the right place at the right time, I can't send a speech." But I can send the feeling of the purge, the grief of the hostages, the integrity of the summit. I can show the levy soldiers the face of the council's peace while they sleep. It was a gambit of staggering risk. To pour her consciousness into the ley lines could shatter her mind. It would leave her utterly vulnerable for hours. Boren shook his head. Magic dreams, it's not a strategy, it's a prayer. It is our only strategy that isn't suicide, Kalen stated flatly, his decision made. He looked at Alara, and the respect in his eyes was a tangible thing. Where? The Heartstone, she said without hesitation. The deep cave at the Ironwood Center where the ley lines converge. I felt it when we trained, it's the loudest whisper. Kalen nodded. Then that is where we make our stand, not with an army but with a truth that will seep into their souls. He stood, his authority settling over the room. Boren, Gwyn, Thorn, fortify the outer perimeter. Make it look like we prepare for a last stand. Let their scouts see it. Meanwhile, we will wage a war they cannot armor against. The alphas, though doubtful, obeyed. The king's certainty was a force of nature. Later, alone with Alara on the keep's rampart, looking out at the forest now dotted with the campfires of their people, Kalen spoke softly. This could break you, Alara. Sending your consciousness out like that, it is a burden no one has carried for an age. I know, she whispered, watching the flames flicker like fallen stars. But it is the burden I was born for, isn't it? Not to swing a sword, but to heal a sickness, the sickness in their minds. She turned to him. Will you be my anchor? While I'm gone, he placed a hand over his own heart where the resonance between them hummed its constant, quiet tune. I am your shield, your sword, and your anchor. Always, you will not be alone in the dark. 3 days later, the air grew thick with the approach of the levy. Alara stood at the mouth of the Heartstone Cave, a natural cathedral of glittering quartz and deep, humming energy. Kalen was behind her, a vow of protection in his stance. She took a final, steadying breath, feeling the weight of every hope, every life in the Ironwood resting on what she was about to attempt. She was not a general, she was a weaver. And she was about to weave a dream of truth into the fabric of the night, hoping it would be strong enough to stop an army. She stepped into the humming dark, the fate of the rebellion cradled in her silent, silver hands. The Heartstone Cave was not dark. It glowed with a soft, internal bioluminescence, crystals pulsing with the slow, deep rhythm of the Earth's heart. In its center, a massive, smooth stone rose from the floor like an altar, veined with silver and cobalt. The hum here was not a sound, but a vibration that passed through bone and soul. This was the nexus, the place where the whispers of the land became a clear, singular voice. Alara approached the stone, the cool air raising goosebumps on her skin. Kalen took a position at the cave's entrance, his back to her, a silent, immovable guardian between her and the world. The trust was absolute, and it gave her the courage to lay her hands upon the Heartstone. The moment her skin touched the cool mineral surface, the world dissolved. She was no longer in the cave, she was everywhere and nowhere. She was the deep root clutching granite. She was the hidden spring singing in the dark. She was the memory of the first snowfall on the first mountain. The ley lines spread out from her like a luminous, silver nervous system, reaching under forests, across plains, threading beneath rivers, and under the sleeping camp of the 2,000-strong levy army, now encamped a day's march from the Ironwood border. This was the plan, not to attack but to infect. To plant a seed of doubt so profound it would rot the will to fight from the inside. She focused, pouring her consciousness, not her power but her truth, into the ley lines. She sent not words but pure, distilled emotion. She sent the searing, lonely fear of the child in the execution circle. She sent the crushing weight of the betrayal by Lyra's turned shoulder. She sent the clear, cold image of the High Seer's masked face, promising peace while demanding blood. Then she reached deeper into the shared memory of the land itself. She found the old, scarred-over wound of the purge. She didn't show gore, she showed the silence afterward. the empty dens, the howls that went unanswered, the songs that were never sung again. The profound, aching loss that had crippled the soul of the wolf kind. She wrapped this grief around the current fear, the image of the Frostmane Alpha's son dead in his cell, the missing Riverfin elder, the hostages trembling in dark places. She wove them together. This is the council's peace. This is the stability they protect, with graves and chains and lies. Finally, she offered a contrast, a single, clear feeling, the sense of rightness she had felt when the Ironwood accepted her, the warmth of the refugee child's hand in hers. The unshakable, resonant strength of Kaelin's vow at her back. This is what they fear, not destruction, wholeness. She pushed this tapestry of truth, painful, beautiful, and undeniable, along the silver threads of the ley lines directly into the earth beneath the levy's camp. And then she waited, a ghost in the stone, feeling the echo of her sending ripple outward. In the camp, a grizzled veteran from the Stoneclaw pack jolted awake from a dream of his own pup, taken as a guest of honor to the spire. In the dream, his pup's eyes were old and filled with a sadness he didn't understand. He lay in the dark, his chest tight, the official reason for this war, to purge a world-corrupting abomination, feeling suddenly thin and false. A young levy conscript from a minor pack dreamed of walking through a forest of weeping trees. From their branches hung not leaves but tiny, glowing locks of hair, the hair of children. A masked figure in black robes offered him a sword and pointed to a light in the distance. "Cut it out," the figure said, but the light felt warm like his grandmother's embrace. He dropped the sword. The levy's second in command, a hardened career soldier utterly loyal to the council, dreamed of standing on a plain of cracked earth under a bleeding sky. He tried to shout orders, but his voice made no sound. The soldiers around him looked through him, their eyes reflecting a silver light that showed him not as a commander, but as a hollow man holding a rusty chain. The dreams took root. They were subtle, personal, tailored by each sleeper's own fears and loves. They did not command rebellion. They asked a single, haunting question: who are you fighting for? Back in the Heartstone Cave, the toll was immense. Ilara was a conduit for an ocean of sorrow and hope, and it was scouring her from the inside out. She felt the grief of centuries, the fear of thousands, the fragile hope of her own people. It was a whirlpool threatening to dissolve her identity. She clung to one solid point in the maelstrom, the steady, blue-fire pulse of the bond with Kaelin. It was a lifeline, an anchor in the storm of collective unconsciousness. "I am here. You are not alone." Hours passed. The night deepened. In the camp, dawn approached, but a strange, listless quiet had replaced the usual martial bustle. Men went about their duties with haunted eyes, avoiding each other's gazes. Arguments broke out over nothing. The certainty that had marched them here was leaking away like water from a cracked cup. As the first true light of dawn tinged the sky, Ilara pulled back. It was like dragging herself from the depths of a freezing lake. Her consciousness snapped back into her body in the cave with a jolt that felt like a physical blow. She collapsed against the Heartstone, gasping, her body racked with tremors, silver tears, actual tears of liquid light streaming down her face. Kaelin was at her side in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground. He gathered her into his arms, his own face etched with concern. "Ilara. Speak to me." She couldn't. She was empty, a vessel drained. She could only cling to him, her fingers gripping his tunic, drawing strength from his solid reality. The horrors and hopes of 1,000 souls echoed in the hollows of her mind. Finally, she found a whisper. "It's done, the seed is planted." He held her tighter, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Rest now, the next move is theirs." A scout arrived at the cave mouth just as Kaelin was carrying her out into the weak morning sun. The scout's eyes were wide with disbelief. "My king, the levy, they're not breaking camp, but they're just standing down. No formations, no drills. Their commanders are shouting, but the men are just sitting or staring at the ironwood line. It's like they're waiting for something. Or remembering something." Kaelin looked down at the exhausted woman in his arms, her silver eyes dim but unbroken. A fierce, proud light burned in his own. "They are remembering," he said softly. "She has given them back their memories." The conventional army at their gates was neutralized, not by force but by conscience. The first and bloodiest battle of the war had been won in the realm of dreams, but as Kaelin carried Alara back to the keep, he knew the council's response would not be so subtle. They had struck at the mind of their enemy. The council, cornered and furious, would now strike at the heart, and Alara, the Dreamweaver, had left hers utterly exposed. The silence from the enemy camp was not surrender, it was the eye of the hurricane. And the storm was yet to come. For 2 days a tense, surreal peace lay over the borderlands. The Levy army did not advance, it did not retreat. It sat like a beached leviathan, paralyzed by the doubt sown in its dreams. Within the Ironwood, hope, fragile and giddy, began to bloom. They had faced down an army with nothing but truth. The legend of the silver-eyed queen grew, whispered around campfires with awe. Alara recovered slowly. The psychic ordeal had left her fragile, her connection to the vast power within her feeling thin and frayed. She spent her time in the sunlight near the willow, drawing quiet strength from its roots, letting the mundane rhythms of the growing refugee camp, the chopping of wood, the laughter of children, anchor her back to reality. Kaelin was ever present, but his vigilance had a new, sharper edge. He knew the council, they would not accept this humiliation. A direct assault had failed, subterfuge was next. His scouts reported strange, small disturbances, a warded perimeter alarm tripped by nothing, the scent of unfamiliar magic on the western wind, a single Raven Guard scout captured and dead by his own poison before he could be questioned. The enemy was probing, searching for a crack. The crack they found was not in their defenses but in their humanity. On the third evening, as a thick fog rolled in from the Blackwood, muffling sound and sight, a desperate cry echoed from the healer's tent at the edge of the main camp. A child was sick. Not a normal sickness. Her skin was hot as a forge, her veins traced with a faint, sickly green light. She convulsed, crying out for her mother in a voice that grew weaker by the hour. Her mother, Sella, was a gentle she-wolf from the Riverfin pack. She knelt by her daughter's cot, her face a mask of terror. "It's the blight shiver," she sobbed to Kaelin and Alara, who had come swiftly. A magical sickness. The council's healers would use it sometimes on those who questioned. "I've never seen it in a child." Kaelin examined the girl, his face darkening. "This is no natural illness. This is a targeted curse, subtle, slow." He looked at Sella. "Has anyone new come to the camp? Anyone who showed undue interest in your daughter?" Sella shook her head, weeping. "No one. She's just a little girl." But as the night wore on, more cases appeared. An elder who had spoken boldly against the council at the summit took to his bed, shaking with the same green-veined fever. Then a young warrior from the Frostmane pack. The sickness was not contagious in the usual way, it seemed to strike at random, but each victim was someone important to the rebellion's spirit, a beloved elder, a brave warrior, an innocent child. Panic, cold and insidious, began to spread through the Ironwood faster than any plague. The sanctuary was violated. Their enemy was not at the gates, he was inside the walls, invisible, striking at their most vulnerable. Whispers started. Was it her? Did the Silver Eyes bring this corruption with her? Is this the true face of the old magic? Alara felt the suspicion like a physical chill. She moved through the camp, trying to help, to comfort, but she saw the frightened glances, the subtle drawing away. The council's strategy was diabolical. They couldn't defeat Kaelin's strength or Alara's truth, so they would poison the well of faith they relied upon. Kaelin worked tirelessly with the few healers they had, but council magic was insidious. "The curse is keyed to a specific resonance," he told Alara in a low voice away from the frightened crowd. "It's attuned to loyalty, to the emotional signature of those most fervently devoted to our cause. It's a weapon that attacks the heart of our community. We have to find the source, Alara said, her own heart aching as she heard another child's weak cry. It can't just be in the air. It's not, it's being carried. Kaelin's eyes were like chips of flint, an object cursed and placed here. It must be something innocuous, something that moves among us. They began a desperate, silent search. They examined food stores, water sources, the healer's supplies. They found nothing. It was Alara, in her exhaustion and despair, who finally felt it. She was sitting by the sick child's cot, humming the lullaby, trying to pour gentle, healing energy into the little girl. As she hummed, she extended her frayed senses not outward but into the very air of the tent, searching for the malevolent pattern, and she felt it. A discordant, oily note in the harmonious energy of the camp. It was faint, moving. It was coming from outside. She stood abruptly and walked out of the tent, Kaelin following. She moved like a sleepwalker, her silver eyes seeing not the physical world but the flow of magical energy. The green, sickly thread led her away from the main camp, toward the old willow tree by the keep. There, sitting on a mossy stone, was an old man. He was from the Stoneclaw pack, a quiet elder named Corvin who kept to himself, whittling small toys for the children. He was whittling now a little wooden wolf. He looked up as they approached, his eyes kind and sad. "The children are suffering," he said, his voice trembling with genuine grief. "Yes," Alara said softly, her gaze fixed not on his face but on his hands. On the piece of wood he was carving, it was a dark, resinous heartwood, rare in the ironwood, and it pulsed with a vile, hidden green light. The curse wasn't in the air, it was in the gifts. The innocent-looking toys, given freely, carried the sickness into the heart of families. Corvin saw her understanding. His kind face crumpled not into guilt but into a profound, terrifying shame. Tears filled his eyes. "They have my grandson," he whispered, the words a confession torn from his soul. "In the spire, they said if I didn't bring the cursed wood here and carve, they would make him a levy scout on the front line. A child, they said no one would be hurt, just demoralized. They lied." He dropped the wood and the knife as if they were white-hot, his hands shaking. "The sickness, I didn't know. The enemy's cruelty knew no bounds. They had weaponized a grandfather's love." Kaelin moved not toward Corvin in anger but to the discarded wood. He wrapped it in a piece of lead-lined cloth from his pouch containing its vile energy. "Where is the rest of the wood, Corvin?" The old man pointed a trembling finger toward a hollow at the base of the willow. "There, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Alara felt no anger toward him, only a crushing sorrow. This was the council's true face, not grand battles but this, the corruption of love, the exploitation of weakness, the poisoning of hope from within. The source was contained. The cursed objects were gathered and burned in a purified fire. The sickness would run its course, but without the source to feed it, the healers said the victims would recover. But the damage was deeper than any fever. The sanctuary had been violated, trust was broken. The camp was shrouded in a new kind of fear, the fear of the friend, the gift, the kind word. The council had shown them that even their safest spaces were not safe. That night, under a cloak of stars, Alara stood with Kaelin on the keep's rampart, looking over the camp that was now shadowed by suspicion. "They win by making us fear each other," she said, her voice heavy, "by making us question every kindness." Kaelin was silent for a long time. "Then we must be kinder," he finally said, his voice low and firm. "We must trust more openly, even when it is a risk. We must prove that their poison cannot thrive in the soil of our community." He looked at her, the moonlight sharp on his profile. "You showed them truth, now we must show them trust. It is the only antidote." The shadow had been found and cast out, but its chill lingered. The war was no longer at their borders, it was in their hearts. And the next battle would be to win back the faith that had been stolen in the night, one act of unwavering trust at a time. The council had thrown a stone of corruption into their pond. Now they had to ensure the ripples did not drown them all. A moon passed. a moon of slow healing, of watchful silences, of wounds that knitted not just in flesh but in spirit. The green-veined fever broke. The child Lyra laughed again in her mother's arms. The Frostmane warrior retook his post, his eyes harder but his loyalty tempered like steel. The council's shadow had been cast out, but its memory was a scar on the soul of the Ironwood. Yet from that scar grew a fierce, new resilience. Kaelin's words became their creed. Suspicion was met with deliberate openness. Gifts were accepted with grateful smiles, their safety quietly verified not with accusation but with shared responsibility. The community, tested by treachery, did not shatter. It fused, becoming something tougher, more conscious, more real. They were no longer just refugees, they were a people, forged in the fire of shared trials. Illyra's strength returned, but it was different. The vast, untamed power was still there, a silver ocean within her, but she had learned its tides. She no longer feared its depth, she respected its currents. She could call a shimmering shield with a thought, make a barren patch of earth bloom with a touch, or send a pulse of calming energy through a frightened crowd. She was learning to be not just a vessel for the first blood, but its conscious, compassionate will. The Levy army, after weeks of listless encampment, finally broke, not with a charge but with a quiet disintegration. Units from packs whose hostages had been mysteriously relocated to safer, undisclosed locations, a feat Kaelin's own stealth operatives had accomplished at great risk, melted away in the night. Others simply laid down their arms and walked toward the Ironwood line, not as conquerors, but as supplicants, their eyes hollow with the shared dream memory of the purge. The council's great blade had turned to sand in its grasp. But the silence from the Raven's spire was more ominous than any army. The council was wounded, humiliated, and desperate. A cornered beast is the most dangerous. The final move came not with a declaration, but with a single, tattered messenger falcon that landed on Kaelin's windowsill at dawn. The message tied to its leg was brief, and its author sent a bolt of cold fury through him. "You have your victory, king of broken oaths. We have her mother. The traitor Anya did not die in childbirth. She has been our guest for 18 years. Come to the spire, alone, disarmed, or watch her die slowly, knowing her daughter's rebellion killed her. The circle closes, the Raven Council." Kaelin crushed the parchment. He had to tell her. The news would be a devastation, a reopening of every old wound. Anya was alive. A prisoner, a tool held in reserve for their most desperate hour. He found Illyra by the Heartstone Cave, not inside, but tending a small garden of night-blooming flowers she had encouraged to grow on its sunlit flank. She looked up, a smile touching her lips, which faded when she saw his face. He told her. He showed her the note. Her reaction was not what he expected. There was no scream, no collapse. She went very still, her silver eyes wide, the color draining from her face. She reached out and took the parchment, her fingers tracing the cruel words. For a long minute she said nothing. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then she looked up, and her eyes were not filled with tears, but with a calm, terrifying fire. "All my life," she said, her voice quiet as the rustle of the leaves above them, "I believed I was alone, an accident, a mistake that killed my mother. That was the first lie, the foundation of every other lie they built." She crumpled the note. "They have had her for 18 years. For that alone they have forfeited any right to rule." "It's a trap, Illyra," Kaelin said, his voice rough with emotion. "They want to separate us, to break you by breaking her in front of you. To kill me when I am alone." "I know," she nodded slowly, "so we will not do what they expect." She looked toward the south, toward the distant, unseen Raven spire. "They want a king and a frightened girl. They want a rescue mission. They want a tragedy." She turned her blazing silver gaze back to him. "We will give them a coronation." The plan was born not in the war room, but in that sun-dappled clearing. It was audacious, it was insane. It was the only move left that held their integrity whole. They would go to the Raven Spire, not as stealthy infiltrators but as sovereigns. They would not hide, they would march, and they would not go alone. Word went out. Not a call to arms for a battle, but an invitation to a reckoning. To every pack in the Northern Territories, loyalist or rebel, hostage-taker or hostage, the message was sent: come to the Raven Spire. Witness the end of an age. The line of Ulrich demands justice for its stolen matriarch. The Alpha King demands an accounting for broken oaths. The future demands the past be settled. It was a gauntlet thrown at the feet of the entire world, and the world came. Curiosity, fear, hatred, hope, they all drew wolves from every mountain and forest. By the time Kaelin and Alara, riding at the head of a solemn procession of their Ironwood people and allied packs, reached the bleak plains below the monolithic Raven Spire, a vast, silent multitude had gathered on the surrounding hills. The air crackled with a tension so sharp it could draw blood. The spire itself, a jagged obsidian claw scraping the sky, was silent. The great gates were shut. No raven guard lined the walls. It was a fortress of dreadful quiet. Kaelin and Alara dismounted. They wore no armor. He wore the gray and frost blue of his kingship. She wore the twilight dress and the willow crown, the moonstone blazing with pure, defiant light. They walked hand in hand toward the gates, their people a still, loyal sea behind them. Before the gates, they stopped. Council of Ravens. Kaelin's voice roared, amplified by his power, echoing off the stone hills and into every heart. You are summoned, you who rule from shadows, who speak through masks. Come forth, face the sun, face the daughter of the line you tried to erase. Face the king whose peace you shattered. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of ancient hinges, the colossal gates began to swing inward. From the darkness within, the 9 elders emerged. They wore their full ceremonial regalia, masks glinting, but their formation was tight, defensive. Behind them, ranks of Raven Guard stood, but their stance was uncertain. Before them, held between 2 guards, was a woman. She was thin, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face pale and etched with years of suffering. But her eyes, they were the same luminous silver as Alara's. Anya, she was alive. The sight stole the breath from the entire field. Alara, her mother's voice was a frail whisper that somehow carried. Alara took a sharp, shuddering breath, but she did not run forward. She held her ground, her grip on Kaelin's hand tightening. Mother, she called back, her voice strong, clear, and filled with a love that was also a promise. I am here, and this ends today. The High Seer stepped forward, her voice a desperate shriek. You see, the corruption is generational. We contain it for the good of all. Surrender now, or the mother pays for the daughter's sins. It was their final, pathetic card, violence. Kaelin let go of Alara's hand. He took a single step forward, and as he did, he began to shift, but not into the hybrid warrior form. This was the full, legendary shift of the Alpha King. He grew, fur of darkest midnight rippling over expanding muscle, until he stood as a giant wolf of pure power and majesty, his eyes twin blue stars. A collective gasp rose from the thousands of onlookers. Many had never seen a true alpha shift, but he was not the only one. Alara closed her eyes. She thought not of anger, not of fear for her mother, but of the promise of the dawn after a long night, of roots breaking through stone. Of a song that could not be silenced. She let the ocean within her rise not as a tsunami, but as a tide of radiant, silver light. When she opened her eyes, they blazed like full moons. Silver fur, like living mercury, traced over her skin. She grew not to match Kaelin's massive size, but into a form of sleek, powerful, and utterly feminine grace, a wolf sculpted from moonlight and starlight, the first wolf, Ulrich's true heir. Together, the Midnight King and the Moonlight Queen stood before the spire. Their combined presence, the perfect harmony of the resonance, rolled outward in a wave of pure, awe-inspiring sovereignty. It was not an attack, it was a revelation. The Raven Guard dropped to their knees, weapons clattering from numb hands, overwhelmed by the primal authority. The council elders staggered back, their masks hiding faces now surely twisted in utter terror. The myth they had fought to suppress was standing before them, more magnificent and real than any story. Ilara in her true form spoke, her voice a melodic chime that resonated in every mind. The time of masks and lies is over. Your reign ends here, not by my claw, but by the truth you can no longer hide from. She turned her great silver head toward the multitude on the hills, people of the north. You have been led by fear and fed on lies. Look upon your rulers, they are empty masks. Look upon your history, it lives in my blood. I do not ask for your loyalty. I offer you a choice, the dark, hollow spire of the past, or the living, breathing future we can build together. A roar erupted from the hills. It started with the Ironwood contingent and swept like wildfire through the gathered packs, a roar of approval, of release, of a decision made. The will of the people, so long manipulated, turned like a tide against the spire. Seeing their power, their very foundation, crumble to nothing before this display of united truth, the council broke. Some elders turned and fled into the dark maw of the spire. The high seer stood her ground for a moment longer, then with a strangled cry, she tore off her own mask, revealing a face old and twisted with hatred, before she too retreated into the shadows. It was over. Without a single blow struck in anger, the centuries-old regime had fallen. Kaelin and Ilara shifted back to their human forms. The guards holding Anya had long since released her and fled. Ilara ran the final steps and caught her mother as she swayed, holding her tight, 18 years of loneliness and lies dissolving in their shared tears. Kaelin looked at the open, defeated spire, then at the jubilant crowds, then at the two silver-eyed women embracing. The war was won. Not with bloodshed, but with a greater power, undeniable truth, unwavering courage, and a love that refused to stay buried. He walked to them, placing a protective hand on Ilara's shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears and dawning peace. The girl abandoned in the evil forest was gone. In her place stood a queen with her king at her side and a world to heal. Together they turned to face the rising sun, the shadows of the spire shrinking behind them. A new day was dawning for the north. A day of truth, a day of unity, the day of the first queen. Like, subscribe, and comment for part 2.